So before I get into anything, if you have not finished reading Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone completely, go ahead and close this video and go finish that before you watch any of this. So if you have finished everything, and congratulations on finishing the book, really proud of you guys for doing that. And we're just going to jump into some stuff. I've got some things to highlight. I really hope that for those of you who have experienced the story before, that you enjoyed it all the more for whatever time this may have been that you have read the book. And for those of you who have read it for the first time, I hope that the entire thing was an enjoyable experience for you. I know it was for me, reading it all over again for probably the fifth or sixth time, but it has again sparked my interest in the entire world. And as you can see right above my head are all of my books in the background for the series, and I am well into Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets right now, and I am loving it. So maybe I'll get all of these read again before this is all over. But anyway, I got some stuff to jump into. I'm just going to highlight some things as we move through these particular chapters, and then I'll give you guys some things to think about. So let's hop on over to the presentation, and we will go from there. All right, let me click on the present button up here. And then there we will go. All right, so chapter 14, some things to point out about Norbert, the Norwegian Ridgeback. Well, maybe not about Norbert himself, but just some things to remember and to highlight from this particular chapter. So there is a wonderful, lovely picture of Norbert. He's not the most attractive dragon by any means, but then again, I never knew a dragon that was exactly cute. But, you know, that's how Jim Kay illustrates him. So in this particular chapter, Rowling continues to further characterize Hagrid as this loving yet naively optimistic character. It's almost like Hagrid cannot recognize evil. He's way too trusting of everyone, and that's just like really, that makes us love him. He always sees a good side, and he even sees that good side in potentially dangerous creatures. To Hagrid's mind, a creature even as destructive as a dragon could be good. Because it's a living thing. And of course, Hagrid can recognize evil, but he has a very limited view, a very limited viewpoint, a very limited worldview, and that things are good. And he's right to a certain extent that there is an element of goodness in everything, and maybe Rowling is touching on something larger there. But other than that, we see this ultimately through his love of this creature. But ultimately, this misguided trust, and maybe not in this particular chapter, but this misguided trust of Hagrid eventually accidentally reveals the secret of getting past Fluffy later on when, he's actually getting this egg from this random person in the leaky cauldron, and they're playing a game of poker, and so the egg is bet, and of course Hagrid gets the egg, but he's had a couple of drinks in him, and so the other person uses that against Hagrid, uses Hagrid's worldview against him, and his viewpoint against him to get the secret of how do you get past Fluffy. And of course, that's to play a little music and he'll go right to sleep, which is not something that needs to be heard. And of course, they don't figure this out in this chapter, but I thought it was relevant to include it here. So to Hagrid, there's this whole idea of that, there's bad consequences from good intentions. He wants to have the egg so he can, raise the dragon as his own, be its mommy or whatever. But there are bad consequences that result from those good intentions. And that's reversal of the previous breaking rules theme. So again, Rowling is adding some complex stuff here. But regardless, this ultimately creates this sympathetic, loving character that we know Hagrid to be. Because from the beginning, Hagrid is the one who rescues Harry. He brings Harry to number 4 Privet Drive at the very beginning of all of this. He's one of the first magical characters that we meet. He again shows up 11 years later to find Harry and take him and, care for him and take him off the Diagon Alley. And Hagrid really is the first wizard friend. He is the first wizard friend, or wizarding, magical type friend that Harry finds. And so ultimately, all of this continues to create this sympathetic, lovable, yet ultimately this oaf of a type of character who just drinks too much and has a big heart. But eventually, as the chapter goes along, they decide that Norbert needs to be transferred to Charlie Weasley, Ron's older brother, who studies dragons in Romania. So Charlie's friends show up on Broomstick at night, and Hermione and Harry sneak off to one of the towers under the invisibility cloak to give the dragon to Charlie's friends, and they take him off to Romania. But unfortunately, because of all of this and because of Neville trying to warn them of Draco, and because Draco had found out about the dragon, he's lurking around trying to get them caught. Of course, Draco was caught by McGonagall and 20 points are taken from Slytherin, but also the 3 Gryffindors and all of this are also caught. And unfortunately, the invisibility cloak is left at the top of the tower. And so because of this, there's detention, and all 3 students lose 150 points for what they were caught doing. They lose 50 points apiece, but that totals into 150 points. And for, for the House Cup competition, that is an incredible amount of points to be lost. When students only earn like 5 points here and there for doing really well in class, 150 altogether, that is a significant blow, and there's no way that Gryffindor can ever recover from such. And of course, because of this, Harry feels that he's lost his identity. He's become the hero of Gryffindor. He's become their new star seeker. He's broken the rules to get onto the team. He's won 2 Quidditch matches because of it. Harry is, famous and popular for being himself, and not because he's the famous Harry Potter. But because of all of this, he feels that he's lost his identity. For being one of the most popular and admired people at the school, Harry was suddenly the most hated. And again, this continues that actually, just to point out that Harry had finally found his place. He's not that lost child anymore. He's slowly coming out of that. And then because of all of this, he loses all of that notoriety and all that fame that, he's won on his own accord. And that's a big deal for an 11-year-old. I mean, it seems kind of, it seems kind of futile or fleeting. It seems kind of fleeting, base all of that on fame. But Harry earned this for himself. It's the first time that he's found himself. And that's amazing, and he loves that because he's done it on his own accord and not because of his inherited fame, as it were, for something that he didn't actually do. And so, he swears to himself in order to not lose any more points, not to meddle in things that weren't his business from now on. And because of all this, he even goes off to Wood and to Oliver Wood and asks to resign from the team, but Wood won't let him. But then Harry swears this to himself. But then, of course, being the 11-year-old child that he is, once he's made this promise to himself, almost immediately he begins to snoop again. And as he's walking, he hears Professor Quirrell mumbling and like quivering in one of the staff rooms or in this random room in the castle. And then he sees a door open as he sneaks into the room after Quirrell runs off quivering, and he thinks that that's Snape running off. So again, meddling where he shouldn't be meddling. But then later on, and that's just to build more suspense, but later on they go to the Forbidden Forest, himself, Hermione, Neville, and Draco to go perform this detention in the Forbidden Forest, as you guys all remember. And the forest itself is an incredible use of world building. There's all kinds of unknown stuff in this forest. And as the series continues, Rowling continues to go back to the forest to reveal all kinds of stuff. I mean, there are centaurs in the forest. There are other creatures that are scary in the forest. There's unicorns in the forest. There's dark things in the forest. There is a reason that it is forbidden. And it's the source of mystery and intrigue. And this kind of that just adds to this mystery element that the whole book has been about this entire time. So that's just an interesting note that she's using another, subsetting of Hogwarts to continue the whole world building aspect. And seeing the centaurs and having them look up at stars and giving them their whole culture of, stargazing and fortune telling and prophecy and that kind of stuff. And astrology is very, very interesting. And it's an excellent use of world building. But there's some other things to point out here, such as the unicorn that is very important in these chapters. The unicorn itself, at least on my cover of the book, which I can show it to you right here, hold it up to the camera. So on my cover of the book with the unicorn right here, it's depicted as being a white unicorn. And at least in most places where the unicorn appears, in most mythological cases, it is a white horse. And of course, white being the symbol of innocence and purity. And of course, it's a unicorn that they're hunting for, and just to find the culprit of this particular murder and this thing that's killing unicorns, that's what they're looking for. But to slay a unicorn is a terrible thing because it's this innocent, pure creature that's done nothing wrong. And so because of that, Firenze, one of the centaurs, tells Harry that, to kill such a beautiful creature for your own gain, unicorn blood will save you from death, but the second that you take from it, you'll be cursed for the rest of your life. And so it's not a good gamble, of course, because you're killing something so pure and innocent and lovely, which is exactly what Voldemort did when he killed Harry's parents. And so as Harry is viewing this hooded figure, this cloaked figure drinking the blood, his scar begins to hurt. And of course, that is tied to, darkness, and it's tied to Voldemort himself. And so Harry slowly makes the connection that his scar hurts when Voldemort is near, or Voldemort's presence or influence is near. And of course, this brings us back to Voldemort's name, which I told you all originally meant to flee from death, which is an accurate translation, but a more accurate translation would be flight of death, which again is another word for flee, not like flying like a bird or an airplane, but flight as in fleeing from something, flying away from something, which is exactly what he does here. He, flies away from the unicorn, but also it could mean theft of death, to steal death. Or to take what is rightfully death's, because Voldemort should be dead, but he's somehow hanging on. His spirit is clinging on to life somehow. And so, of course, this terrifies Harry, and the next chapter starts off with Harry has no idea how he ever made it. In the years later, he would have no idea how he made it through his exams when he expected Voldemort to come crashing through the school at any moment. But then at the end of this chapter, there is that secret assistance again that shows up with the invisibility cloak folded nice on Harry's bed, and it says, just in case. So whoever this particular person is, which of course you all know who it is by now, that gifted the cloak to Harry, is continuing to give this thing to him just in case he might need it, because as we know, that particular person knows a little bit more about what's going on than we believe that he actually does. All right, moving on to chapter 16. So the kids finish their exams and they get a week off from school, just a week off to hang with their friends and enjoy Hogwarts and not have to worry about school. And that's so nice. And honestly, that's how college feels like for that last week. If you don't have exams and your teachers are nice enough to give you your exams right beforehand, you get a week just to chill with your friends. And I just think that's a really interesting thing, especially for these 11-year-old kids to experience. I remember my last semester at Bryan, this same kind of thing happened, and I went and saw Avengers Endgame 3 different times with 3 different sets of friends, and it was great. And so it's just that nice freedom of still getting to be with your friends, but still being in a school setting, but with no school. It's incredible. And so the kids have a lot of fun during all of that, or all the other students are having a lot of fun. Harry's about to lose his mind because it was one particular night, Dumbledore is away at the Ministry. And so Harry deduces that if he's gone away at the Ministry of Magic, the stone's going to be stolen tonight, because obviously that makes the most sense. And of course, this leads to a big argument between Harry and Ron and Hermione. And it's more Harry versus Hermione, but this argument basically reveals that he's going to go do it because he doesn't care about the House Cup. He doesn't care about his own fame. He doesn't care about his academic standing and whether he could get expelled or not if he goes down there to try to get the stone. And so it ultimately results in this idea that, Harry's beliefs about good versus evil and good triumphing over evil and protecting Hogwarts, protecting his newfound home, and protecting, the entire wizarding world and the world itself from Voldemort's dark designs is far greater than any House Cup or academics or grades or points or fame or glory or anything of that. Harry is willing to sacrifice himself and sacrifice his own credibility and his own standing to go up against Voldemort. The kid is 11 years old. This is amazing because it shows how smart Harry is, even at 11 years old. It shows how wise he is for an 11-year-old kid, because he's already learned a lot and has had quite a few, formative experiences in these 2 semesters at Hogwarts. But it just ends in this, Harry is really showing why he's a Gryffindor in this particular moment. And then, but he's not the only one to prove why he's a Gryffindor. And so they decide that they're going to go off and do it. But then as they are, waiting in the common room and deciding to leave with Harry, Ron, and Hermione and put on the cloak and go down and, stop Voldemort from getting the stone, Neville Longbottom, the kid who is the most awkward, the most clumsy, and obviously the weirdest kid, and that odd, awkward kid in the house and in the school itself, he proves why he's a Gryffindor. He stops his friends standing there, proving that I am brave. even though I'm this awkward, kid who nobody believes in. I believe that I'm strong enough to stop you. And of course he's not. But Neville is a gem, and unfortunately he gets hit with the leg locker curse. Or with the Petrificus Totalis spell, and that just freezes him there and he falls to his face so they can get past him. But of course Hermione says that she's so sorry. But anyway, it's a huge formative moment for Neville to do that. But anyway, so they get there. I'm not going to narrate through all this because it's quite a lot, but I find it very interesting that there are 7 challenges. Of course, 7 being a number of completion that's tied to, this number 7's throughout Scripture as being this complete number. The idea of 7 just has this, this feeling of completion to it, and there's probably some deeper meanings to all of this, and I don't know what that is, but I find it really interesting that there are 7 different challenges that are protecting the stone, 7 different trials, 7 different puzzles, enchantments that have to be solved to get through, which is just quite fascinating. And of course the kids have everything that they need to get through them all, and they work together as a team. Each member of this trio relies on their own skills to get through all of these challenges. And even Ron gets to shine in playing the chess game and sacrificing himself. And even though it's quite likely could possibly kill him, he's willing to die to save the stone as well, which also reveals why he's a Gryffindor as well. And of course, Hermione gets to play with her logic, and she gets to remember the random thing that Professor Sprout said about going up against the Devil's Snare, and and Harry even gets to, shine in his own way and be that leader and getting them through. He gets to shine on a broomstick to find the key to get through the door. But anyway, they all have to work together and all let each other shine and take direction from one another to get through all of these puzzles. And I find that really interesting that Rowling is, elevating the idea of teamwork and relying upon individual skills to reach a common goal. It's very subtle, but that's why it's so powerful, because it's so subtle. And then just an interesting fact that Snape's logic puzzle actually reveals his brilliance, because as Hermione says, a wizard can know all the magic in the world, but most wizards are terrible at logic puzzles. And so since that's the final puzzle to get to the actual, the 7th chamber that has the mirror in it, that does reveal Snape's brilliance. And I think that that's just an interesting note on him. But at the end of this chapter, we're told there was already someone there in the final chamber. But it wasn't Snape. It wasn't even Voldemort. And as you all know, it was Professor Quirinus Quirrell. Now, I wish that I could have been there when, those of you who haven't read this, or it's been a long time, or especially, I'm just thinking of Addie, because I know that she hasn't experienced this before. I wish that I could have seen your face and seen your reaction when you got to this point. I hope it was a big reaction. If it wasn't, that's fine. But I just want to know, so we'll talk about that later. But anyway, it's Professor Quirrell, and Rowling has been planting the seeds the whole time, as you realize later on, about why it's Quirrell and not Snape, and how she's misdirected us to look at Snape, because Snape's a terrible man. He treats Harry like crap. But then it's actually Quirrell, and when you go back and look at stuff, and for those of you who probably caught on, you're like, oh my gosh, he was so obvious with it. But there are these blink and you miss it moments where it's so obvious that it's Quirrell, but of course we don't recognize that because that's how well it's written, because the Quirrell moments are so well paced and there's so much more drama and action happening where these things should be being revealed or should be revealed, that we don't notice it. And that's what makes it such a powerful, reveal that it's actually Quirrell and not Snape. Going into this, I won't go into that. Well, yeah, okay. So Quirrell's first name comes from the name Janus Quirinus, which, for those of you who are up on your Greek and Roman mythology, Janus was the two-faced god of beginnings and endings and the god of doorways. Because a doorway could be a beginning or it could be an end, and he had 2 faces, one to symbolize beginnings and one to symbolize endings. And just as Professor Quirrell has 2 faces with his regular face and then Voldemort's face attached to the back of his head, it's a brilliant name. And of course, Quirrell is, obviously, it's the beginning because Professor Quirrell is the first dark wizard that Harry will face in his journey. Now, of course, we know that he will probably face Voldemort later on, but Quirrell is the beginning. He's the first dark wizard that Harry has to defeat, which is very interesting that his name is tied to this idea of beginnings. And of course, Quirrell is a possible portmanteau or two words being joined together to make a new word of squirrel and quiver, which is just perfect for him because Squirrel, he obviously has squirrel-like tendencies because, he's very, scared of everybody. And then he's always quivering with his stutter and whatnot. But of course, you guys know what goes down in this. The Mirror of Erised has been moved there as Dumbledore said that it would be moved. But of course, we realize that this is its new place to protect the stone. And so Harry figures out the puzzle, gets the stone in his pocket, and then ends up facing Voldemort face to face. Yes. And then ends up taking them down, taking both of them down because as Voldemort is screaming to Quirrell to seize Harry and take care of him, the second he touches him, he starts to burn and is in searing pain. And so Harry decides that he'll just take himself and, basically just, put his hands on the face. And then, of course, the pain is so much in his scar because he's right there at Voldemort and the connection between the scar and Voldemort, since Voldemort gave him the scar. There's some deeper meaning there and some deeper reveals there that happen later about why the scar hurts. I won't get into that. But anyway, all of that goes down and then Harry passes out and then wakes up in the hospital wing, safely protecting the stone and securing the goodness in the battle of good versus evil, and good triumphs over evil. Which is interesting because while all of this is going down, Quirrell says something quite fascinating, or Voldemort may say it, but there is no good and evil. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it. And of course, Rowling is tying this back, and this is something you guys should probably write down. If you haven't been writing down everything, you really should be. But this is something that Rowling ties back to the idea that Niccolo Machiavelli, in his wonderful classic, The Prince, this is very much tied to that old classic work about political corruption and political motivation, and that everything is politically is motivated for power and gain. It's pretty dark, pretty bleak view of politics, but it's been regarded as one of the principal texts on how power can corrupt. And this is definitely the idea that Voldemort takes. Voldemort doesn't consider himself evil. Voldemort considers himself as an agent of gaining power, and that power should be wielded by those who seek to wield it, to subject and subdue those who are less powerful. And that's Voldemort's entire thing. And of course, that ties back to, pure blood wizards and all of that stuff. And, it's a very Hitler-esque kind of thing. Okay, so moving on. All right, so Harry wakes up in the hospital wing, and Dumbledore's there. Of course, good old Dumbledore, tells him that what happened down in the dungeons between you and Professor Quirrell is a complete secret. This is like one of the best lines in the whole book. So naturally, the whole school knows. This is just a very universal thing for small schools, but it's also just this very quirky thing for Dumbledore to say. Think about this. A breakup happens at RCA. The whole school knows within a matter of 5 minutes, from the kindergartners to the seniors. Everybody knows everything in a span of 5 minutes because that's just how news travels, and it's great. So that's how things work. But when you think about it, by doing a little bit of math and noting how many kids are in each house, in each level, or in each year, and that there's 7 years, there are probably close to 250 students total at Hogwarts. It's probably under 300, but 250, maybe close 280 as a generous estimate is probably the number of students who are at Hogwarts. It is an incredibly small school to fit inside one complete castle. And so, news travels fast, and that's just how it works. It reminds me of Brian as well. So for those of you looking to go to a small Christian school or to Brian as well, this is what you get to look forward to. There are no secrets at a small school. So that's just really interesting that Rowling decides to include that. But, through this conversation, there's a lot of things that happen as Dumbledore's reflecting on everything and explaining everything to Harry. He's explaining how Harry got the stone, which is, of course, that only someone who wanted to find the stone and not use it would be able to, get what they wanted from, or actually find the stone just to protect it. And he couldn't be touched by Quirrell and Voldemort because of the mark of love that had been left on Harry by his mother And of course, that's the thing that defeated Voldemort in the beginning. And of course, it's still that mark leaves something everlasting and eternal on Harry. Also, Dumbledore reveals himself as the anonymous gifter of the invisibility cloak and has therefore, as I said in the last lecture, completely fulfilled his white spirit role as the guide and as the person who gives Harry a tool or something to help in his quest. And of course, it's Dumbledore, because who else wouldn't it be? And of course, it's Dumbledore who gives it to him the second time. And of course, Harry keeps asking questions about his parents and the night that his parents died and other stuff. And he promises to tell Harry more of that story when the time is right, when Harry is old enough to deal with it, because there's obviously some darker things that are going on. And this is just the beginning of one grand big saga, one big long story that has a lot more details to it. And Harry isn't ready for them. He just wants Harry to enjoy the fact he defeated the Dark Wizard as an 11-year-old. He saved the stone. Everything is good. And then, of course, there's at the end of this when Dumbledore is eating one of the ever-flavored beans and goes, alas, earwax. It's the ever-constant balance of quirkiness and eternal wisdom. Dumbledore has to always end on a quirky note. That's just who he is. And that makes us somehow respect him even more because he knows what he's talking about. And he's such this lovable, adorable father figure who is also this incredibly powerful wizard. But this also sets up this interesting thing because Dumbledore is the only person that Voldemort's scared of. And, Dumbledore uses his power for good. So clearly, the whole power thing that Voldemort and Quirrell said in the dungeons is not true, because you can still be powerful and still be good. There is good and evil. And yes, it is tied to power, but it is not used for what Voldemort wants to use it for. And that's a very interesting, very subtle comparison and parallel that's happening there. All right, so we get to the end of term feast. Everything is decked out in Slytherin colors. They have won the House Cup because of all the points that were lost earlier, and so Harry basically gave the victory over to them. But before the celebrations get completely underway, Dumbledore says something fascinating, and he says, before we award the House Cup, however, recent events must be taken into account. I have a few last-minute points to dish out. Let me see, yes. First, to Mr. Ronald Weasley. For the best played game of chess Hogwarts has seen in many years, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Second, to Miss Hermione Granger, for the use of cool logic in the face of fire, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Finally, to Harry, to Mr. Harry Potter, and the room went deadly quiet, for pure nerve and outstanding courage, I award Gryffindor House 60 points. And then Rowling writes that the din was deafening. And those that could do math in their head knew that Gryffindor and Slytherin were now tied for the House Cup. And Harry thought if only he would have awarded me one more point, which at the time 60 points was a huge amount of points. But Harry's like, just one more, and we would have won just one more. He's bad to beat that 11-year-old kid. He doesn't care about anything else. He's bad to beat a 11-year-old kid. He wants to win the House Cup because who doesn't want to win the House Cup? And then Dumbledore raises his hand, and the room fell silent. And he says, there are all kinds of courage. It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. I therefore award 10 points to Mr. Neville Longbottom. So someone standing outside the Great Hall might well have thought that some sort of explosion had taken place. So loud was the noise that erupted from the Gryffindor table. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood up to yell and cheer as Neville, white with shock, disappeared under a pile of people hugging him. He'd never won so much as a point for Gryffindor House before. Harry, still cheering, nudged Ron in the ribs and pointed at Malfoy, which couldn't have looked more stunned and horrified if he just had the body bind curse put on him. Which means, Dumbledore called over the storm of applause, for even Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were celebrating the downfall of Slytherin. We need a little change of decoration. They win the cup. There's a huge celebration. Slytherin has been dethroned in their 6-year reign as the House Cup champion. So at the end of all of this, as everything wraps up, the lost child of Harry Potter is lost no more. He has cemented his role as the heroic leader in multiple ways. He now has dear friends, a dear guide in Albus Dumbledore, and a home at Hogwarts to call his own. Harry's comfortable with himself. He understands that he was and now is loved deeply for nothing more than who he actually is. And it's brilliant. It's such a good story. It's such a well-told story. The lost child is lost no more. Rowling has satisfied the conventions of the children's literature genre. She has made things work to such an incredible degree. And there's no other way to end it than just to let that sit and to let her brilliance shine. There's a reason she's my favorite author. And I hope that I have been able to illustrate that to you guys and illustrate just how great of a writer she is and just how great of a story this is. And, you know, this is just the beginning. There's 6 more books. And gosh, does it get better from here. So anyway, that's it for this lecture. Just a couple of things on the quiz. Just to let you guys prep for that. So there are 14 multiple choice. It's a little bit longer just because there's a lot of content in these particular chapters. There's 3 short answer questions that have to do mainly with the conversation that Dumbledore has with Harry while he's sitting on the bed in the hospital wing. So I would go back and read that conversation that they have because you will have to explain some of what happens during all of that. And then there is a bonus question about the 7 challenges in the underground chamber. So other than that, that is everything from me. I'm so glad we made it through the book. Sometime this week, I should be delivering copies of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and The Magician's Nephew to your mailboxes. So I have all of your addresses on GradeLink, and I will be doing a delivery service. So just check your mail, and I will let you know when you get those books. But congratulations on finishing Sorcerer's Stone. I'm going to keep reading through the whole series. Can't wait to do that. And I will see you guys whenever we have our discussion. If we haven't done that today, or we'll do that later today, whenever you're watching this. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Go ahead and take your quiz now, and I will get back to you soon.